Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is May 2nd. On this day in 1995, 18-year-old Kiplyn Davis vanished from her high school in Spanish Fork, Utah. What began as a normal school day turned into a lifelong nightmare for her family. Today, we're going to talk about Kiplyn Davis, her disappearance, and the investigation that would stretch across decades with multiple arrests, court battles, and lingering questions that still haven't fully been answered. Let's get started. Kiplyn Davis was born on July 1st, 1979, and grew up in Spanish Fork, a close-knit town in Utah County. She was the third of four kids in a family that, by all accounts, was deeply connected. Her father, Richard Davis, would go on to play a major role in keeping her case in the public eye and advocating for other missing children. At 15, Kiplyn was a sophomore at Spanish Fork High. She was outgoing and vibrant and was known for her bright red hair and her big smile. The morning of May 2nd, 1995 started with a small disagreement between Kiplyn and her parents about whether or not she could dye her hair. It wasn't a big blow-up, it was just a typical teenage parent kind of tension. And at the time, her parents never could have imagined that it would be their last conversation with her. Kiplyn headed off to school like any other day. She attended her morning classes and friends saw her in the cafeteria around lunchtime. And nothing seemed off. She was acting normal, chatting with friends, and made no mentions of any plans to skip class or leave school early. But after lunch, she simply disappeared. She never made it to her fourth or fifth period classes, and when she didn't come home that afternoon, her parents grew worried. They called around to friends, neighbors, but nobody had seen her, and so their worry quickly turned into panic. By that evening, it was clear this wasn't just teenage rebellion or someone blowing off steam after a family argument. Kiplyn hadn't run away. They knew that something was wrong. But at first, the investigation focused on the possibility that she had run away. After all, she was a teenager and there had been a minor argument at home that morning. But her parents never believed that that was the case, and they had good reason. Kiplyn had left behind everything she probably would have wanted to take with her. Her purse, her money, her makeup, even her dental retainer. All of it was still in her school locker. Her room was untouched, and she hadn't taken any extra clothes. There were no signs that she had planned to leave. The community rallied quickly. Police searched the school grounds and the surrounding areas, including canyons and parks. Volunteers helped canvass neighborhoods. Her face was printed on posters and shared by local media across Utah County. When investigators started talking to students at Spanish Fork High, they heard conflicting stories. While Kiplyn had definitely been seen earlier in the day, no one could really say for sure where she went after lunch. Several names came up during early interviews, but one in particular stood out. Timmy Brent Olson, another student at the school. Olson had a reputation for trouble, and he was questioned early in the investigation, and his answers were vague and contradictory. Still, at the time, there just wasn't enough evidence to make an arrest. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. No suspects were charged, and there were no solid leads. Kiplyn's parents refused to let the case fade, though. They continued to speak out, organizing search efforts, staying in touch with police, and pushing for answers any way they could. By the late 90s, most investigators had come to believe that Kiplyn had been murdered. Still, without a body, there was no way to confirm that, or maybe to bring anybody to justice. In 1999, 4 years after her disappearance, the Davis family held a memorial service for Kiplyn. They even placed a headstone in the Spanish Fork City Cemetery. It was heartbreaking, but for them, it was a way to honor and acknowledge what they were beginning to accept, that Kiplyn was likely gone forever. But still, they never stopped searching. It wasn't until the early 2000s that things finally started to change, thanks in part to the persistence of Kiplyn's family and the involvement of federal authorities, including the FBI. Instead of going after a murder charge right away, prosecutors decided to take a different angle. They started focusing on perjury. They believed that several people who had been at the school with Kiplyn on the day she disappeared were lying. So they brought them in front of a federal grand jury and started asking questions under oath. When the stories didn't line up and didn't match previous statements, the indictments started rolling in. And among those charged, Timothy Brent Olson. Also facing perjury or obstruction charges were Christopher Neil Jepson, Scott Brunson, Rucker Leifson, and Gary Blackmore, all of them former classmates of Kiplyn's. In 2005, Olson was formally indicted for lying to the grand jury. During the trial, witnesses testified that he had privately confessed to playing a role in Kiplyn's death. One person said Olson admitted to sexually assaulting her and helping to bury her body. Still, he denied involvement in court, and no physical evidence has been found to link him to the crime scene. Despite that, Olson was convicted of perjury in 2006 and sentenced to 12.5 years in federal prison. Then, in 2011, he entered into a plea agreement with Utah prosecutors. Olson pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. He admitted to being present when she died and helping to hide her body, but he claimed that someone else was actually the one who killed her. He said that this person hit Kiplyn in the head with a rock and that afterward, the two of them moved her body and buried it in a remote location. But here's the kicker. Olson has never named that second person, and he says he can't exactly remember where they buried her. As part of the plea deal, Olson received an additional sentence, between 1 and 15 years in Utah State Prison, to be served after he finished his federal term. Meanwhile, the others charged with lying during the investigation faced a range of consequences. Some served time, others got probation, but prosecutors made it clear. Their lies delayed justice, possibly for years. And still, Kiplyn's body has never been found. Today, Kiplyn Davis's case is still technically open. Her father, Richard Davis, has never stopped speaking out. He became an advocate for missing children and for families dealing with unresolved disappearances. He worked closely with law enforcement, the media, and other organizations, always making sure that Kiplyn's story stayed in the spotlight. The headstone that her family placed in 1999 still stands in the Spanish Fork Cemetery. It's symbolic, of course. Her actual resting place remains unknown, which is something that continues to cause deep pain for her loved ones. In 2021, Olson appeared before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole for the first time. He repeated what he'd said during his plea, that he couldn't remember where Kiplyn was buried, and he wouldn't name the person he claimed was responsible. The board denied his release, and they made it clear that his continued silence was a major factor in their decision. Multiple search efforts have been launched based on Olson's vague comments. Searches of canyons, fields, and rivers near Spanish Fork, but none have led to Kiplyn. Her case has become a symbol of both perseverance and frustration. On one hand, her family succeeded in holding someone accountable, but on the other, the final piece, bringing her home, remains missing. Every May 2nd, Kiplyn is remembered not just as a victim, but as a vibrant teenager. She was someone who loved drama club, who had normal arguments with her parents, and who left for school one day and never came back. And she didn't deserve what happened to her. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Kiplyn's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me here again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!